29th special council meeting and workshop to order. And moving on to the roll call, Councilor Robertson, Councilor Mitchell, Councilor Wingard, Councilor Gardner, Councilor Grenier, and myself are present. I think Councilor Osher is going to join us shortly, but we'll move on. And the next item is public hearings, and we have two public hearings tonight. The first public hearing is to consider a moratorium ordinance regarding marijuana retail stores, specifically limited to the commercial 2 zoning district. That we're going to turn that over to our planner.
I think he is coming onto the panel.
Hi, everyone. So we have in front of us a moratorium for marijuana retail stores, specifically in the commercial 2 district. A little under a month ago at the March 9th election, the town voted to kind of approve the draft ordinance language that would opt in to allow the town to have marijuana businesses. This includes the testing facilities, manufacturing facilities, cultivation facilities, and retail stores, which include adult use, medical, and dispensaries. But part of that was allowing marijuana stores in the C2 district on Park Street. And what we came to realize was that there were some kind of, things that just didn't meet the exact intention of the direction that we wanted to go as far as setbacks are concerned from the university property line and entrance. And it created a situation on that corridor where in most of the corridor, it would be impossible to operate a marijuana retail store with the certain uses that are there that would require being set back from. And the few spots that you would be allowed to operate a retail store are probably areas that were actually not intended to have one when we were developing the ordinance language. So this moratorium would kind of give us the time to re-examine the specific uses along the Park Street corridor and kind of work out what those setbacks should be specific to that location. This would have no impact on the rest of the marijuana establishments ordinance language that was adopted. So as far as retail stores in the commercial 1 district and testing and manufacturing and cultivation facilities elsewhere in town, those would all still be allowed to go forward come the effective date of that ordinance on April 8th. So applications for projects for those things could still be looked at and reviewed and processed and licensed. This would be specifically putting kind of a delay on the retail stores in the Park Street area so that we could work out the details. So again, this is just for the moratorium that would allow us to kind of take a closer look at some options for the Park Street corridor. Happy to answer any questions.
You have to unmute, Tom.
Tom, you
If
might want to
anybody else has questions in the interim?
Tom, if you take your mouse down to the bottom of your screen and maybe make your screen maximized, that might help you see your controls.
So may I ask a question while we're waiting for Tom to have access?
Okay. So I'm on a phone now, but I'm getting all this feedback.
If you turn the volume off your computer, that should help.
So I have just closed my computer and I'm going to use my phone. Darn it. Can you hear me? Okay, so now we are open to questions, comments. I didn't see any public members on the list when I looked, but there may be somebody out there.
Tom, I know that Keith Maneker is looking to ask a question.
Okay. So Keith, can we bring him up and let him ask, since it's a public hearing?
I have allowed Keith to speak. Keith, you'll need to unmute.
Hey there, can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Oh, thank you. You can't see me though, right?
correct.
Okay. Love Zoom. I was just wondering, as you guys move forward, I've had lots of conversations with Kyle about this, and you know, if you do in fact decide to move forward and allow the Park Street corridor to be a place where you may consider, I would just love an opportunity to talk more about what it is that would be most desirable for Park Street. When Kyle was introducing this meeting, he mentioned that it seems that either you're going to be right at the entrance of the university, or there's almost nowhere to be because of other setbacks that are part of this. So, yeah, I mean, my question would be, is it possible to know what some of the criteria you're looking for might be, I suppose, as you reconsider that corridor?
I'm sure there'll be a lot of opportunity to talk about it. The purpose of the moratorium is to give our staff an opportunity to study the situation further and come back with some recommendations. And the recommendations will be discussed at a public meeting, and there'll be an opportunity for community comment. Do we have any other questions or comments, either from the public or from council members?
I just have a question. So I have been so impressed with Kyle and Dave. They gave us presentations over the last several years talking about marijuana and what they've learned from other towns, and they've been very thoughtful. So I was really surprised to see this, and so I assume that this is based on, you know, now that the town approved, then you get to the details of people approaching you, and that's when you learn the specifics. So could you just repeat again what it was that made you realize that you were going to ask us to consider voting for a moratorium? Again, I'm always impressed with how thoughtful you are, and so this isn't a negative. I just want to get more of the details that you've learned that brought you to this.
Sure. So in general, when we were coming up with those setbacks from different sensitive uses, you know, childcare, places of worship, schools, things like that, we in general made those measurements from property lines. So it says, you know, you couldn't have a marijuana retail store within X number of feet of the property line of some other use, whether it's childcare or whatever. But due to the fact that a lot of the the marijuana uses would be zoned in commercial districts where it's possible to have things like shopping centers or multiple commercial structures on a single property. We created a kind of exception in there where it would be measured, instead of using the property line as the point of measurement, we'd use the building instead, if it was on one of those properties, like a shopping center or something like that. So when people were showing interest in the Park Street corridor, we got a legal opinion to kind of see whether or not that exception would also apply to the university. Because we had a standard in there that required any marijuana store be set back from the university property line. So it would make a big difference whether or not we were setting back from the property line or the nearest building. So it came back that it would, in fact, the exception would apply to the university, and you'd be measuring to the nearest building on campus, in which case that opened up a lot of lots around the entranceway to the university, which through discussions, it seemed like it was not council's intention to necessarily allow retail stores in that area. So that was the primary reason. And kind of as we started getting more specific questions from people interested in developing those stores, the sorts of things we were seeing that kind of led to looking at it a little more closely and realizing that it might not match exactly what council had envisioned. And then so the moratorium would allow for kind of a deeper look into how to go about it.
Thank you for the explanation, Kyle.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments?
I think that makes a lot of sense. I do recall us thinking that, talking about it as it being from the property line. But I thought that Keith Maneker's question about what is our vision for the Park Street corridor. I know that we've talked a lot about it, and we had presentations from an landscape architecture firm or planning design firm talking about how far back buildings would be from the street in that area, and trying to make it a better walking place. But what I haven't seen, and maybe I missed it, is a discussion of lot by lot. So when we've looked at, say, around Main Street, when we've had requests to expand the Mill Street commercial district, we ended up looking lot by lot because someone wanted to be included. And so we really talked about how which street facing, how we wanted it to be, and what uses. So I don't know if we've done that for Park Street. So that basically what Keith was getting at is, do we have a vision that says, what we would like to see in the way of development there, what we wouldn't like to see, that's generalized, not specific to a marijuana dispensary or retail store, but just in general, sort of a vision plan for how we want that, the commercial use of that to be. I know that we had one about its walkability. But that's a little different.
So the land use ordinance kind of lays out an intent for all of the zoning districts. So that's the easiest thing to point to as far as a general overview of the intent of the C2 district. It's meant as a mixed use district with residential of all types and smaller scale commercial uses. So if you then look at the land use table and see what types of commercial uses are allowed there, restaurants, retail stores, offices, things like that, you start to get a vision from a use perspective of kind of where the ordinance is guiding the corridor, and then combine that with, like you were talking about, those design standards that were created and adopted. That's sort of the bulk of the feel that we've created for Park Street. Marijuana retail stores specifically were identified for that area because we tried to match where we were allowing marijuana businesses to where their kind of regular counterpart was already allowed. So C2 is a district that allows retail, so it would make sense that the marijuana retail stores would possibly be allowed there as well. So yeah.
But at the end of the day, the issue is that with the setbacks that we put in place, the marijuana retail stores would either be allowed adjacent to the entrance to the University of Maine, which the council expressly said it didn't want, or up in the corner of the C2, given the rest of the setbacks, correct, Kyle?
Correct. Yeah, and if we took the setback across the whole university property line, then that would pretty much get rid of every lot's viability in the C2. So that's what they're just, the moratorium would allow for some discussion of whether, you know, the setback should be from the university property line or the university entranceway. We can look at, you know, some of the other existing uses on the corridor as far as places of worship and childcare go, and you know, more closely look at some of that lot to lot type thing to see if there are any potential places where it would work, where it would be feasible, and if it wouldn't be feasible, what's the direction that council wants to go in from there. So I think that would be the bulk of the conversation during the moratorium.
So the moratorium gives us an opportunity to look and to study and to look at the options. And our goal is to not drag it out any longer than it needs to be and to get this resolved in a reasonably quick manner.
Correct.
Okay, any other comments or discussion on this? I'm on my cell phone now, so I can't see what the participant list is. And so I don't know if there's anybody else in the public that wants to comment on it.
Councilor Perry, we do have Keith with his hand raised again. No other new people with their hand raised.
If he has an additional comment, then let's hear it.
Thank you. I'll be really brief. First of all, Lauren, answer your question about some of the things as you look at this corridor. There's two properties that I looked at already. The first I had under an option to purchase if the vote was positive that we recently had. That was 161 Park Street. It's still for sale. It turned out, as the crow flies, it was about 125 feet too close to the Talmar Woods childcare. It was pretty far as you might travel by foot or car, but as the crow flies, it was just a bit too close. But it was a fairly rundown property that I would certainly want to improve. But then when I found out that one wasn't going to work, my second choice was 112 Park Street. And that's where I think we realized all of a sudden, well, like, oh my God, like someone could open up a retail dispensary at the entrance to the university. So I fully understand. I was kind of surprised myself that was even an option. But I guess as you enter into this moratorium and look at various properties, I hope that part of what we'll consider is you know how these measurements are actually measured, and also I hope that maybe building standards will be considered as well. I'm sure someone could buy a place like Park Street, 161 Park Street, and practically do nothing with it and open up a dispensary. I've seen that done in other communities where it's just a rundown house. So I'm hoping that as this is discussed, maybe there'll be even additional standards with regard to the building site itself. It would be nice if someone took some of these older rundown or even condemnable properties and made them into attractive commercial properties that are in line with what's already there, which of course I would be more than willing to do as things go forward. So that's all. Thanks for letting me speak. I appreciate you all with all your time and attention to this.
Thank you, Keith, for your comments. We'll certainly keep those in mind. Anything else on this topic? If not, we will close public hearing A and move on to public hearing B. which is to consider amending the town fee schedule related to marijuana establishment licensing and fees for police services. So 2 items, licensing of marijuana establishments and fees rather, and fees for police services. Sophie, is this you?
That is me. When we adopted, or when the ordinance related to marijuana was considered, we actually had a piece of it that had to do with licensing, and this is the annual business license for marijuana establishments. And remember, there are multiple types: retail, manufacturing, testing, and cultivation at 3 different levels. We, at the last council committee meeting, discussed, staff had gone out and done a bit of research and found a wide array of options. The fee schedule the fees that we charge has to represent a cost of doing business. And that cost can be in processing the application. It can be dealing with the regulatory compliance. It can be impact in the community. And so we went through the number that council seemed to have the highest degree of comfort with was $2,000 per year for a retail establishment, $600 a year for manufacturing, $0 a year for testing, but they would still have to get the license, so we were aware what was happening and could make sure that they were following the ordinance. Cultivation tier 1, $600 a year, tier 2, $700 a year, and tier 3, $800 a year. So those were the proposed new fees for marijuana business licenses. This would be charged annually when they renewed their license. Council will look at this again in June when we look at the fee schedule. My sense is you might leave it for another year, but that is 100% your choice. The other item that we're asking you to consider is the fee for police response to large gatherings. We have an ordinance that talks about a fee that can be charged, but in order to charge a fee, it has to be on the fee schedule. So the ordinance speaks to a maximum of $500 per event. It's very old. It would cost us a lot more than that to respond. What we are suggesting is $500 per event plus actual costs incurred. So if the town gets a bill, we pass that bill along to the taxpayer.
And just to piggyback on those comments a little bit, we reviewed the fee schedules of several other communities, and we landed about in the middle of those, that wide range of fee schedules in other communities. So with that introduction, we'll open the public hearing and see if there are any public comments or if anybody else has a question. Do we have anybody in the electronic audience that wishes to comment on this?
There are no hands raised at this time.
All right. Any comments from council members then?
Yes, I just want to say that taking the numbers that Dave Mylan had given us and Mitch had given us at the last meeting, that our $2,000 a year for retail is actually a little bit less than average. So I think we're in the ballpark for pretty much all of the fees, and it seems like we're on target with other communities. But at the same time, we're very calculated about what we're charging. So that was good to hear. So I think $2,000, which sounds high, is really not as high as it could be. So that's all I wanted to say.
Tom, you're muted.
This is not a good night for me on computers.
If there are no other comments, we'll leave our special council meeting and move on to our workshop.
Can
Yeah.
we just clarify for folks that we intend to have a brief special town meeting, a special council meeting on Monday, April 5th, to formally consider the moratorium and the fee schedule?
Thank you for bringing that up. And that's in conjunction with a committee meeting that's already scheduled for that date. Yep. Okay. So moving on to the workshop, our first item is discussion formalizing the draft diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. We've had some written material. It came in our packet, and I think Laura has some additional slides that she's going to share with us as well. So turn this over, I guess, to Laura.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you've seen, are you seeing my slides now?
I am not.
Oh, here we go. Now
Yep.
Are you?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to summarize the document that that the public has seen. And so let me just get this. Okay. So this was following some great conversations that the council had on this issue. And at our last discussion of this, I offered to provide a middle ground approach between the two proposals and combine some of the strong aspects of each together. And so this is a potential path forward for Orono in 2021, working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's worth noting that a lot of work has been done on this. Staff has done a lot. There's lots of regional work that the town is involved in. And so I really wanted to highlight that this is about building on the foundation and growing, and that we've got a foundation in place. However, the purpose and intent of this work was to amplify and engage the voice of minority and marginalized populations in Orono's municipal government, to uphold and fulfill Orono's values of being a welcoming and inclusive community and ensuring equity and justice for all. So we want to build on and highlight the DEI work staff and council have already started, and understand and address the unique issues in Orono. And we really want to move quickly. We know that there are community members that are ready and want to engage on this. However, we want to understand things better. And so we want to remain nimble to figure out how we move forward over the long term. So this is a short-term response. I think there's work within the town that needs to happen within the council and within municipal staff to build on the foundation that they've already started. And so I identified 6 action areas that were encompassed in the proposals and work that had already been laid out. The critical start is around stakeholder engagement, and then ongoing education and furthering that education around DEI and social justice issues, developing and implementing new policies or highlighting policies that are in place that can be improved, developing tools, conducting an asset inventory to understand the status of where council and the town is in working on DEI issues. This is where there's a foundation in place and we need to just figure out what that is and how to build on it. And then increasing transparency of once we've done this inventory, once we've engaged stakeholders, how do we provide more access and understanding for people to get where we're at. So council work. It's laid out in more detail in the document. This is kind of a high level overview. The 6 action areas from stakeholder engagement down through to transparency are laid out across the next few months and what the response would look like. The critical step here would be council appointing a committee, a short-term ad hoc committee of primarily residents of Orono, primarily individuals that bring lived experience in a marginalized population or a minority population. And if not, then somebody that directly works for or leads a group that serves those populations. And so their charge would be to implement a survey. A draft of some of that was shared in the full document. Do some inventory work of their own. What other groups are already working on this in Orono? And the town and the council's community development committee would also do a little bit of inventory work on their own. What proclamations are in place? What resolutions do we have in place that might support this work? And then wrapping up with some recommendations of where do we go from here? How do we build upon what is a welcoming and diverse community to make it even stronger and more welcoming and more diverse? And looking and hearing from the committee around those priorities to implement by August. So the council education would be ongoing. Some policy opportunities that I see coming up could be identifying a diversity calendar. For instance, councilors had said last year that Juneteenth kind of popped up last minute and they wanted to have a proclamation. So by having a diversity calendar, we could identify different events and highlight and tell like the history from the marginalized population's perspective, and kind of reset around some historical events and acknowledge that. And then a land acknowledgement statement around our indigenous populations is something that the council could work on as well. And then as you move into the future, you start thinking about, okay, what did the committee recommend for policy changes? Key tools, a glossary, you talked about that before, a DEI decision toolkit. That would come off of some reading that we would do around a racial equity toolkit. There's examples of those that are used around the nation. And so we could read about them and then think about, okay, what might that look like for Orono? And then just the asset inventory work, what proclamations are in place, what resolutions and statements, what ordinances are there to pull together, and then provide some transparency around those things. So that was the council work. That's the meat of most of this. A lot of the town work now would be around continuing the senior staff DEI work group that they have internally, and then providing some support to the committee if needed. They would participate in and continue to participate in annual education, develop some policies around, or not even develop, but more formalize some policies around practice and how to address DEI issues within the workplace. And then develop some tools to help make that happen. In the inventory, identify committees that the town is involved in that are working on DEI issues. Are there trainings that they've done? Is there policy that they have in place? And be able to share those and be transparent about those. And this next slide is what the ad hoc committee would be charged with, that the council would appoint in April. And it would be to review and finalize the survey. There was some draft questions shared in the document, but they would finalize that, push it out online, and in other methods described in the document. And then come up with some key findings by June, finalize with some actionable specific recommendations to then present to the council by August. And so this just lays out that. As I was looking and thinking about this plan and thinking about the next steps for Orono, I looked at some best practices for DEI work across some big cities, not correlated with Orono. But some of the best practices that they had identified was to have a DEI strategic plan. I feel like by doing the work that we have laid out here on an Orono scale of a survey and an inventory and recommendations from people with lived experience, that starts to lay out a plan for us. Leadership assigned is the next one that's a best practice, and budget, a way to measure and track, and employee engagement. So we're not, as a small town, we're not necessarily going to fulfill all of these to the depth that a city might, but there are areas to think about as far as how and what we implement. So that, I'm going to stop my share and happy to answer questions and from counselors or the public.
Let's start with counselors and see if any of our council members have questions or comments about what's been presented, as well as what you received in your packet.
I have comments.
Please.
So thank you so much. I really love a spreadsheet, love the timelines, love the way you've broken it out by with the council and the town and the staff. So I think that's wonderful. Overall, what I was missing in the written part, and that wasn't so much in the graphics started with it more, but in the written part, it didn't appear to me to be person first, so that your ad hoc committee description, section 1, and again, I wrote these comments before I saw your presentation, so I wasn't going up. Your presentation did, on the upper left-hand corner of your graphics, said, appoint a committee, but the paperwork that we had for this package and what you sent last week, which I'm apologizing, I didn't respond last week. It was a pretty short timeline. I had a bunch of other things. So between 6 and midnight on one night, I wasn't able to respond. So anyway, the written part, I think we're supposed to be learning how to talk about person first vocabulary. And so the text was missing the person first, because the ad hoc committee description started with a proposed climate survey. And then it moved on to the proposed creation of a preliminary asset inventory. And although I am completely supportive of the idea of surveying people and evaluating what assets are available, I think that the most important part is the composition of the committee. And I can see that part of it is the concern, since in other committees in our town, often we have open spots. Like you, Councilor Mitchell, thank you for filling a spot on a previous committee before joining the council. But that's been a challenge. So that may be why we're carrying that concern. But I've heard so much excitement about this that I'm not sure that that's going to be as much of a challenge on this committee. So I guess, and there wasn't, although there was a very valuable suggestion of what the survey instrument may look like, it didn't say exactly how the committee would be appointed, whether we'd be using the same application process we use for other committees, or we have something new. And and that was, again, focusing on the people first. That was something I was interested in. So
Laura, any response to those questions, or?
Person first, I will work on that.
We have a hand. We have a hand up.
As far as the how people will be appointed, I think I described who we are potentially working on. I would leave that. I don't know, quite honestly, what discretion we have as council versus what the town prescribes for how we identify people to serve.
Okay.
So I would just say that council gets to decide. And whatever process council decides is what
Right,
staff will
that's all,
implement.
that's all I was saying, is that there's not a process. The process, we could say, we're gonna do it the same way we do this other committee. We could say we're gonna do something new. We're gonna, it's just that's what I was missing, how that will happen and who's gonna be the people. Let's say a call for applications and we use a standardized format that's already on the town. There's a very simple, do you want to apply do something on the council? For the town, that's on the town website. Then the next, besides, the best way to get people is to do some kind of advertising to encourage them. So then
Right.
the outreach would be important. So that would be another way to describe how are we going to get these people? What's our first step in getting these people is what kind of outreach we're going to try to do. And I just want to say thank you for doing this, because it's so great to have a new person come in and synthesize the great work that's been done so far and comments that have been made and put it into this format that's flows so nicely. I guess, and the other thing, my comment I have for what you presented today is you had a new category that I didn't notice in the text that said tools. I love that category. And I would just like to suggest that a possible tool besides a glossary would be, and you did have something that said there might be a budget. So I guess somewhere between the glossary and a budget would be to say what kind of economic tools we might use that we would need the budget for. So to have that economic tool, we would have to have a vision. So, do we want to have programs that we welcome new people who come to Orono to come and meet the council or individual council members or people on the staff and say, oh, you just moved to Orono? We have these informal meetings where new people come. And then at that informal meeting, we say, one of our goals is to make sure that people who are new to town really feel welcomed and have a sense of belonging. And embedded in that is, any of you may be representative of some community that you feel like you're a minority in Orono, and we want to reach out and make sure that you let us know when you're uncomfortable. And so basically, but that would take money if it's staff time. That would take planning if it's council time. But that would be a tool, is that meeting.
Right. I think those were great ideas. And I think that I'm hoping that type of idea would come out of the set of actionable recommendations from the committee that would come back to the council. And then the council could say, okay, this would probably cost, obviously with staff input. And then it would be assigned to say, okay, this is how much money overall it would take to implement these recommendations and prioritize what do we think is most important and what do we have the money to do.
Laura, just to clarify, to make sure I understand, when the tool that you're referring to in your presentation is the Local and Regional Government Alliance on Race and Equity Toolkit. Okay, yeah. So again, I agree. I think that, those are all great ideas. That would probably be something that the committee should develop and propose as recommendations. And I really like the idea of right sizing for Orono, the Local and Regional Government Alliance on Racial and Race and Equity Toolkit. I think that would be a really solid way for us to start thinking about how we make decisions. So just for a few things, I don't know if this is more helpful to throw them out there all at once and see what happens. Really quick on another point of clarification, because I'm the person who started saying that I'm trying to train myself to use person first language. My understanding of person first language means simply saying the person before their identifying feature, instead of saying, disabled person, a person with a disability. That's my understanding of person first language. So there's nothing wrong. I mean, that's not a critique of what you said, Laurie. Sure, we should talk about people, not just things, of course. That's kind of what we do, but person first language has a specific connotation anyway. I think that this is, really well organized. There's a lot of, it's good to take a lot of the stuff that we've been doing and synthesize it here. I wonder about the timeline. I don't know if it's a little bit fast and maybe not as much for the council and staff side, but maybe for the ad hoc committee for two reasons. I know that, 3 months can seem like a long time in the real world, but in the government world, sometimes 3 months goes by very quickly when you're trying to organize meetings. And also having the committee, the ad hoc committee, present its findings in August and then dissolve. I would wonder about how we can incorporate university students, and particularly the international students in the university, if all of the committee work is happening June, July, August. So I wonder if maybe just extending that little piece of the proposal by a month or two might help to bring in, more feedback from that part of our community up for discussion. I was just thinking. I guess that's more a question for Sophie. I was wondering, is there some sort of a reason why the town hasn't adopted a land acknowledgement statement yet? Is there a legal reason or a political reason, or it just never came up, or?
I think it has really never come up. We started to talk about it when Cindy reached out to the Penobscot Nation, and that was kind of on our list of things that we wanted to try to accomplish. That work got stalled with the virus and all of this work, which really dovetails in, but we've kind of lost our fearless leader, who was kind of the point person for that.
I also recall there were some situations going on with the governor that the nation was not returning our calls, and with perhaps understandably, right? There was a period of time that we were communicating, and then there was not communication because of something going on at the state level.
I think when you have a volunteer council chair and folks trying to help us, I think it's just to navigate systems that are a little different and try to figure out how it works. Ultimately, I don't think there is a legal issue with a land acknowledgement. However, before we do much of anything, if I don't know for sure, we usually run it through legal. I do have a draft, but it's Jeff Wingart was kind of helping me with some whereas statements for it to bring it as a resolution that you guys could then as a starting point. So
Okay.
it's some of that work has been done.
Thank you. About the sort of suggested requirements for the makeup of the committee, one thing that I want to make sure, and this was kind of echoed by one of our people in the chat last time, but it's really important to me that we think about the ways in which we can make this as accessible as possible to people who, I think there's a lot of socioeconomic privilege that keeps people from participating in local government, whether that means the time of day that meetings are scheduled, or, basically, do you have the luxury of time to participate when you're a working person, or you're, so I want to make sure that's something that we're keeping on our radar when we're thinking about how we form this group, or, who is invited to participate in it, that it's as open as possible to people who, for socioeconomic reasons, may not necessarily have access to a traditional committee structure or town government structure of meetings. And then the only other thing is, I guess, a kind of a question, Laura, is if you could talk a little bit. I understand the transparency discussion around, consider expanding opportunities for stakeholder public comment in council conversations. I understand, and we can discuss, how we all feel about that, that for the council side. I wasn't so sure about how you envisioned that happening with the staff side. So if the staff is creating a DEI working group, it would be a little, to me, if they wanted to invite members of the public, that would be one thing. But I'm not sure about the members of the public just sort of having access to staff meetings, or maybe I'm misunderstanding.
That's not the way I understand it. The way I understood it is that essentially I would be reporting out for staff, right, Laura? That our work would be on our website as we move through, but that there would be.
So I think and I can share the slide again. So for the town work, public comment opportunities was listed under transparency, and that was in concert with the council. also considering that, how and when might we increase public comment opportunities? And I figured that if potentially council decided that, you know, if we're still Zooming or not, are there additional ways to engage public comment at the workshop or committee meeting level, or even at different intervals during council meetings, that would impact the town as far as how they either technically or agenda development wise kind of implement that, if that was something that council decided that they wanted to do after talking about it. And so the reason I have it in both places is because I felt like there would be implications for town staff if council decided that. Did you have any other questions? Because I can go back and respond to your other two questions.
I think that was all of them. I'm sorry, I threw them all
No,
at you.
that's fine. As far as the timeline goes, I felt like there was an urgency to get the work done. Like from my coming in, 2 weeks ago, it felt like, okay, there's some urgency here. Let's address that. And two, that if we're going to recruit some people to engage and do some work in this committee, that I wanted it to feel manageable and that they could commit to something without it feeling overwhelming. And so I thought that, particularly with the clarity of charge and by choosing some people that really either have lived experience or expertise in this area that I think exist on campus and in the community already doing this work, that we could do this over a short time frame, and that this wouldn't be, this is the one time that we ever ask the community these questions in a survey. And this isn't the end of our work on DEI, but it's really a starting place. And we fulfill some of the purposes and intent of amplifying the voice and meeting the urgency. I am very comfortable revising the timeline, but that's where I was coming from in choosing that. Further, as far as engaging the students, my hope was that we could have some staff leadership of whether it's international students or from the Multicultural Center representing those voices. And with a short online survey, I think people could respond from wherever they are to play a part in it. And again, you could have a recommendation come from the committee to do something in the fall to engage with those groups, or how could the town help publicize events that are already on campus happening with those groups. I mean,
but also put in like an extension possibility. Like if the committee itself gets to August, at the beginning of August, and says, we have more to chew on here, like let's reschedule this for September, October, that it would be okay for us to have flexibility on the end.
Yep, I love that. That's great. Yes.
That's a good idea.
The only thing I would add, just to give a little bit of context, the Town Gown DEI partnership that is already kind of doing work includes representation from the Office of International Students. So we have, I think, a mechanism there, and some of the things you're talking about, like publicizing events on campus and making a larger calendar for the community. Those are things that are on our work plan right now. So that, I think it will dovetail nicely with the work that the committee does. I don't think we'll lose that voice.
There's a member of the public that wants to talk, Tom. I just know that you might not be able to see that, but if there are other counselor comments, we can do that as well.
Yeah, I think I'd like to finish with the counselors first and then go to the public. Excuse me.
I just was going to say, I'm happy to, as far as the timeline goes, to kind of asterisk and say I had mentioned that the committee could report in at 45 and 90 days. And maybe if they hit that 90 days and they feel like we need another, month, I don't think we want to say, keep working for another 6 months, but if they need another short window to kind of wrap up and summarize where they're at, great, that works.
So when you synthesize the various proposals that have been presented, and in my proposal, following the lead of Bangor and many other municipalities, I said that I thought it was important that there were certain groups that we made sure had a seat at the table. So the Penobscots, perhaps, and someone from the Islamic Center, because those are, Orono as a municipality is unique to being the largest municipality, either adjacent or having that community call us to their home. And so that was important to me. And also, again, the process of how we put this advertisement out, who we reach out to, and how we hopefully winnow down from all the many people who want to be participants to get a representative, diverse group. Also, maybe reaching out to the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies, not that they would have a secured seat at the table, but that would be help with advising us. And maybe there'd be people in the community that could help advise us on who would be on this committee.
Yeah, in developing this, I had already reached out to some people from those groups. And I'm happy to kind of use that starting point list off of your proposal to kind of do a little outreach. But I do think we're going to need some type of application. And I mean, I'm happy to help draft that. And if we decide that we want to do this, that maybe I can run through Sophie or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Before, wait, no, Jeff had his hand up, and instead of everybody keep going back and forth, let some of the other councilors hear, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. I appreciate it. I really like this, Laura. Thank you very much. I had my one concern is that in drafts of how this has worked in some other communities, the categorization of people has become sort of prescriptive, and I really feel it's important because our community is small, and because despite its size, it is relatively diverse, that we give the committee the autonomy to sort of self-identify. And I would hate to be in the position as a counselor to tell somebody that they don't have a seat at the committee because we've already filled the slot for them. Sort of denies the power of their self-identity, and it denies the power of intersectionality. So I'm very wary of listing categories in the application document. Thank you.
Other comments from council members? I cannot see your hand, so you're going to have to jump in, I guess.
Terry, did you want to say something?
No, I think Jeff, you that was one of my questions or thoughts was exactly that. So I'm kind of, as opposed to kind of repeating what you just said, I'm thinking the same exact thoughts. The only two other things that I had was that I thought, thank you for clarifying it a bit more, Laura, about the timeline. It did seem a bit of ambitious, but I get what you're saying to make sure it doesn't go too far down the road. Well, and then we don't get to that point of actually getting past the ad hoc. As we get through this process also of looking at who would be on this committee, one of the things that I really want to make sure that as counselors that we're careful of is that we don't let this get hijacked by people who do not fall within the space that we're trying to empower. So just kind of keep that in mind, and that's pretty much what I had.
Good point. Thank you, Terry.
So what I'm hearing is that we need a detailed plan for how to fill this committee.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing? And I'm hearing that we need to somehow find a balance between identifying people that we want on it and letting people self-identify, but making sure that we're also representative of the right groups. So it'll be a little bit of a balance, but I think if we publicly advertise the opportunity to participate and have a public application along with doing some specific outreach that can be fulfilled. So would a draft of that application process, Sophie, when does that need to be developed in order for this group to vote on it with this plan?
So the first thing I would say is we have a volunteer application. So I don't know if you just want to take the current application and morph it just a little bit. I don't think you necessarily have to start from scratch. The second is if you want to start in April, the council, the order creating the committee, I think the plan was to have that on the April 12th regular council meeting for formal action. So there are two ways you can go about it from there. You can either have the list of people at that as part of that order saying who you're appointing, or you can empower the council chair to appoint. I don't know if the council chair wants to go out so far as to be the person who makes this final decision, or if they would bring it back to a committee or something.
Yeah, I would think we need to bring it back. Maybe a smaller group make some recommendations and bring it back to the entire group. I don't think this is a one-person appointment situation.
And Laura, in my travels around the internet to other cities and towns, in all of my research, I came across a lot of different applications, but they weren't that dissimilar from our general volunteer application. Maybe I think Sophie's recommendation of some minor tweaks, particularly kind of a space for a broad narrative, say whatever you want about, like, why do you think you personally would be a good fit for this committee? And it gives people an opportunity to talk about their experience and self-identify in whatever ways they're comfortable with, and would give us some information about, you know, who folks are. And, you know, so I'm happy to pull up some links for that.
Great.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy to draft that ahead of our April 12th meeting.
Thank you, Laura. I think that'd be very helpful.
Teamwork. It makes the dream work.
Any other comments from counselors? We do have, I did want to allow some public comment tonight if there are people who wanted to comment on it. So again, Belle, if there's someone who has their hand up in the public, this would be a good time for them to comment.
We have John Banks, who is now allowed to speak.
I beg your pardon?
You go ahead.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
Oh, great, thank you. I just really wanted to thank the town council for going down this road and engaging in such a deliberative process and putting some strategic planning behind this initiative. So thank you for that. And I'm also particularly happy as a Penobscot tribal member and a resident in the town. I was particularly happy to see that the town is considering a land acknowledgement at some point. I don't think it has to wait till July. I was just, for example, I was just on a webinar presenting to over 300 people just before this meeting, and they did a land acknowledgement. So I don't think it's illegal.
No.
And I just want to thank the council for this process and for going down this road and taking this journey. And I would be, I would offer whatever assistance I could on developing the language for the land acknowledgement. I've worked for the Penobscot Nation as the Natural Resources Director for 40 years now. And I just want to be helpful. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments, John. We appreciate your offer of help as well.
And thank you, John. Just to clarify, I don't think it's illegal either, but one thing I've learned in my time in government service is that when you think, oh, we should just do that, it should be so easy. And then there's some like strange bureaucratic catch that nobody knew except a bureaucratic employee. So that's why I asked.
And any other members of the public that wanted to comment, Belle?
Yes, we have Sarah Marks. I will allow her to speak now.
Thank you.
Hi, I think I unmuted. Did that work?
You're fine, Sarah. We can hear you.
Good. I'm also on my phone, so it's a little strange for me.
Yeah.
Just wanted to also just really say thank you. I just think that it's been such a really thorough process, and I've been just so impressed. Thank you, Councilor Mitchell, but also to Councilor Gardner and Osher and all of the rest of you. It's been a wonderful meeting to watch, and really great ideas from everyone, and such a collaborative process. Mostly a huge thank you. I did want to say that I really loved Councilor Gardner's idea of allowing the committee to ask for an extension. I'm not sure if it will play out on campus, but I have worked on campus before, and I think there are certain voices that you might not get involved until September. So I would hope that if they were allowed to ask for an extension, that time frame would at least go somewhere into October. Was an option for them, depending on how they're finding getting the feedback that they need from the various student communities on campus. So that was really my only piece of feedback, just to try to give them that flexibility, at least into somewhere in October if they feel like they need it. And other than that, just a really, really big thank you to all of you.
Thank you for your comments, Sarah. Bill, anybody else that we would like to hear from?
No other hands raised at this time.
Thank you very much. Any further comments from council? I think we found some areas that we're going to do a little more work on. And we're going to bring this back for formal adoption at our April 12th meeting. So if there's nothing else from council, a big thank you to Laura and to Megan, who did some great work in the beginning. And I think we can move on to our next item if there's no other comments on it. Okay, the next item in our workshop is Council Practices and Policies Manual. And we were especially interested in revisiting the ground rules for meetings, because again, that's really our business, and it doesn't make much sense to put ground rules in unless we agree that those are what we want. And this was a draft that can be modified or changed, and we're ready for some discussion and input on the ground rules for our meetings. Any comments?
Well, I'll start. I will start by saying I think this is a necessity. Don't have to look farther before me just having to kind of grab for Jeff to get time to speak, to say, if we have these things, it's one thing to have them, but to be able to follow them, I'll call people out if you want. But I think I just think we need to be respectful of everybody else, and there's time and there's space that to make their comments. And so, yeah, I like it, but you know, we all have to follow it. So.
Well said. Other comments? Any additions or deletions or modifications that you'd like?
Laura had her hand up.
Laura?
I think it's good. I'm wondering whether there's a way either to just use those orange parts and post them like as a screen during meetings while we're Zooming, and or not like a share screen, but as like the picture of like off of a computer, so it's constantly there as a reminder, because I do think the rubber hits the road when you're in the middle of a conversation. Yeah.
So
having
true.
it constantly there is a good idea. I do wonder, and maybe this can fall under a conversation that the council has around public comment, but like the nitty gritty of like how to engage, like even when I was presenting this and going back and forth with Councilor Gardner, but then Councilor Greenier felt like I wasn't giving everybody a chance to speak. Like, do we need to have even more detailed like process of how to?
Laura, I wasn't thinking that you weren't giving equal, I wasn't thinking you were giving time.
Right.
I just was saying at that moment, people were coming back in on conversations while Jeff had his hand up. So it had nothing to do with you.
Okay, no, but I'm just wondering, like, I don't know how we operate as a group in those types of things. And I'm wondering, do we need a little bit more detail, or is it just because I'm new?
The Zoom universe is weird because I think when we were meeting in person, I found it way easier to just discern from body language, like when people were going to speak. And I think there was a more natural flow. It's really tough on this platform. And so I guess I would just say, like, if we could adopt a practice, at least when we're on Zoom, where if you speak and ask your questions and make your points, like sit back until everyone else has had a chance. And if you see that everyone is all good, or they don't want to talk, or they've said their piece, then you can speak for a second or third time. But like, we can all get, carried away, myself included. So I would like to have that be a Zoom practice that we adopt, just in fairness.
I think that makes sense. And I'm really working at a disadvantage tonight, and I apologize. I'm having trouble with the computer, so I'm on my phone and I can't see you all. I can only see who's speaking, and that's a problem for me. And I could do a better job managing things if I could see everybody.
So I think you're doing a great job,
Yeah.
Councilor Perry, but my thought is, if we go back to the ground rules, and I don't know if I can say this enough, I literally went on the website and got a placeholder. So there is absolutely no pride of authorship. I couldn't make it look this snazzy. So feel free to dig it apart, which is the reason I did it that way. But I like the idea of essentially, instead of Tom's gray screen that I'm seeing now with the camera with a line through it, if we could put something up. I think 10 is a lot. And some of these, I wonder if, like 9, I wonder if 10 like really needs to be on there. Could we like decide maybe the top 5, or so that people could actually see it? And I'm wondering with the Zoom rules, if it would make sense for us to, at the beginning of the meeting, when the chairs call the meeting to order, if they could let the public know kind of what the order for public participation is or is not for the evening, and also reiterate the Zoom rules so that it will not only remind council of both of those things, but it will also let the community know what to expect. What maybe I could work at a little script that then the chairs can make their own, as they do with most scripts I deliver.
Can I add too on that? Just kind of tag on to Sophie said, we keep it consistent. It's consistent that this is the way we approach a public hearing, and that if we have the public speak first, that we have the public speak first, and then the council. If we have the council speak first, and then the public, I think that would make it a little bit easier as well.
Yep, great. Sophie, I think in terms of collapsing these, 1 and 2 could be combined easily. And I think 3 is probably goes right along with it.
I think that 5 and 8 are extremely important, and also the things that maybe I'm a terrible politician. Maybe politicians aren't very good at respecting 5 and 8, because a lot of times people can come in with a very absolute idea about what they want and what they think is right, and they're not going to listen to anyone. And that doesn't, I don't think that helps a group process when there are 7 people trying to come to decisions. And 8, you know, it's politics, but just because politics often happens a certain way doesn't mean we have to play by those rules. So I would like to prioritize those 2.
Yep. Makes sense.
So I'm wondering if 3, 6, and 7 could be collapsed into kind of one.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Does to me.
So
And I think the ones that Megan just highlighted as being really important ones, I certainly agree. Those are pretty key. 5 and 8.
Yep. And I think for 9 is really part of the general process. I don't know that it needs to be up on the screen, and 10 is part of the general process. So what if I kind of create that slide? You'll see it the next time we meet. Val says she'll put it up on her, she'll make her screen that. And which will only be an issue when I'm running the meeting, and then we'll figure out a way around that. The other suggestion I have is that we take the 10, if you like these 10 rules, that we take it printed as blown up, laminate it, and we'll put it on the wall in council chambers so it's big for everybody to see. And I would also like to maybe start thinking about kind of a flow chart for people when they come back into town, when we're having meetings all together, that would be a companion to that blown up poster. Another one that would be a flow chart to tell people how to participate. I've talked to so many people after meetings that are nervous about how they bring their voice forward. And I think that would be we don't want people to feel that way. And that's something that we can put up just in general on the website once we get it created.
Sophie, I actually have it's not quite the same thing, but I already created a flow chart that describes how this, kind of like how a bill becomes a law, but for town council level. I'm happy to share that for you to tweak and amend.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Okay. I also am just curious, because this is, you know, I forget who made the point, maybe it was Terry, that, you know, these rules don't mean anything unless we're all in on them, and we haven't heard from everybody. So for Lori and Jeff, is there a general sense of agreement to these rules, or are there, you know, comments, critiques?
I like the idea of streamlining, but I also like having a set of standards that we can all agree to adhere to.
Lori, do you have any? Excuse me.
I think they're nice, nice cartoons, you know. Cute. You know, it is wordy, and so I'm glad you're reducing it down, because that would be too much to put onto the screen.
Yep.
And the only one that I have, if you were going to list all 10, I keep getting stuck on the one that says think before speaking, because I think I have never felt that there was anyone in our group or anyone who comes to our council meeting who hasn't thought before they speak. So that's just that wording somehow felt not nurturing to people feeling welcome to speak. So, but what it says underneath number 6, I agree with everything. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. I mean, all the stuff that's in blue, I think is great. Something about that orange line, if I were the editor on this one, I would have probably encouraged the person who was the author to change it a little bit. But other than that, I think it's a great starting point, and I thank you very much for bringing it forward.
Okay, so we'll see a revision of this when we are next together, Sophie?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to go to a brief town manager's report?
Excellent. I actually
I have one thing I want to say.
Yes.
If that's okay, Chair, may I interrupt? It's an interruption because it's not on the agenda. So my apologies.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sorry, what my request is, may I interrupt? Because what I'm about to say is not on the agenda and there's no place on the agenda for a counselor to bring up something that they want to bring up. So I can wait until another meeting, or I will do it now at your.
If you can do it relatively quickly, Lori, go ahead.
I can do it quickly. Okay. Hold on. I have to find it. Here it is. The council made a statement to put on the website about the shootings in Atlanta. And I was not present at the meeting because I had a legislator meeting at the same time. And so I missed the discussion of writing it. And when I gave my input during the week, it wasn't not included. And so it was a small, I described why some of the wording I felt a little uncomfortable with, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was yet another shooting after that, and that I felt it was important to make a statement about gun violence. So I'm going to read my statement. Last week, after a man with a gun killed 8 people at businesses owned and operated by Asian people in the Atlanta area, another man with a gun shot and killed another 10 people at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. I send my condolences to the families of the people whose lives were taken, and to all who are feeling and will feel the ripple effect of these losses for years to come. I'm grieving and distraught and frustrated. For years, I've expected our elected officials in the US House and Senate to reduce the chance that any of us will be shot by a man with a gun. I recall the tragic assassinations that occurred during my youth of Medgar Evers and JFK and Malcolm X and MLK and Bobby Kennedy and Harvey Milk and George Moscone and John Lennon and Alan Berg. Horrific, public, bloody. Then starting in the 1980s, there was a rise in the incidence of mass murders with semi-automatic guns. The Congress countered by passing the federal assault weapons ban in 1994. It reduced the ability for men with guns to commit mass murder, but since the ban expired in 2004, mass murders by men with semi-automatic guns have increased exponentially. Here in Orono, we experienced the threat of a shooter on the Orono School's campus in March 2019. My sons were seniors at Orono High School. We were all frightened by the event, and we are grateful that there wasn't actually a shooter firing on our children in Orono that day. But by now, we are all aware that the epidemic of gun violence in the US is here in Maine too. As a state legislator, I'm a member of the bipartisan Gun Safety Caucus. We hope to pass laws that will prevent deaths, but we need to hear from our constituents. State and federal legislators read the correspondence from citizens and look at the proclamations and ordinances passed by local governments to learn what people want. Too many generations have experienced mass murder by men with guns as the norm and not the deviation. Our schools, our workplaces, our homes, our movie theaters, and our concert venues should be free from gun violence. I propose that we in Orono take a stand to prevent gun violence. I invite the other town councilors to join me in a public conversation about how we can lead on this issue. We can begin the conversation by inviting representatives from organizations who are working on this issue to speak with us. 2 of those organizations working in Maine are Everytown for Gun Safety and Maine Gun Safety Coalition. There's also a report about preventing gun violence in schools, and that's from Everytown Research, and I have that attached, and I will send this around to all of you by email. And I'm open to conversations about if we would move from it being a statement that I made as an individual to something that we would say as a town council.
Okay, I would like to postpone a council discussion on this item until a future workshop. Give folks a chance to think about it and see if there's something that we want to tackle as a council or just as individuals.
Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yep. I understand that when we have a person in the audience who did have a hand up that did not get recognized again. Is that still the case?
Yes, Tom.
Okay, would you is it Sarah Marks?
Yes.
Would you recognize her?
She should be able to speak now.
You're on,
hi.
sir.
Hi, Tom. It's really okay if you guys are in a hurry to move on. I just wanted again to say thank you. I really appreciated your last conversation about procedures and ways of speaking with each other. And I just wanted to point out that I looked it up because I was not sure what procedures were. I'd been at different meetings and it seemed different times. I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to do. I'm probably one of those people so mentioned who wasn't sure how to do it. And you guys do have some pretty good ordinances already that I found. You have an ordinance that says that no counselor should interrupt another counselor ever. And only the chair should be able to do that, to call order. And you have some lovely ordinances already. So I guess I just wanted to point out, when you're building whatever next, you have some really nice ones around public comment time also that I wasn't really aware existed. So thank you for building them in the past. And I just wanted to point them out in case maybe you didn't all realize that they're there. I imagine you do know, but thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, Sophie, I think we're now ready to move on to manager's report.
Sure. So I wanted to let you know that I have been tracking the American Rescue Plan, which is the funds that are being allocated to state and local entities. The latest alert that I have from the Government Finance Officers Association kind of has a different list than what I have seen as far as allowed use. So I've held off asking people to kind of think about what that money should be used for in Orono until we get to a point where we actually know what it is. I also wanted to let you know that I was invited to join a small group of managers to meet with Maine Municipal Association to talk about potentially how that money allocation could be rolled out in the state. I think they're working with the governor's office, so that will be kind of be an interesting effort. We are in the final stages of finalizing a consent decree for code violations at 31 Hamlin Street. This is $24,000 consent with $10,000 of it suspended and a promise that they will never do it again. My question for you is, normally I simply sign consents and they go to the vault. Are you okay with that? This is a number that we're not used to seeing. Would you prefer that get confirmed by the council?
I'm personally fine with it going the way it has been before. Does anybody object to that? I hear no objection.
I also wanted to let you know that I have been working with code enforcement. Our new code officer, Pat SD, has been hard at work. And I've asked him to go out and begin a review for potential junkyards in Orono. The thought being that this spring, while it's still muddy and people are thinking about what they might do with their yards, we would send letters saying, we think you might have a junkyard. Here's what the standards are. You might want to apply for a license and meet those standards, or you might want to clean it up before we come back. So kind of a did you know kind of letter. But your phones might start ringing when those go out. They are intended to be a call for people to contact Pat and learn more.
Good.
Wanted to also let you know that I've moved forward with purchase and sale agreement draft with 173 Kelly Road. I've got it in final form. It's going to go to the property owner, and the hope is that that will be on the consent agenda for the April 12th meeting. I sent an email to folks about a positive COVID case at Town Hall. So right now we have 14 people that are out between Town Hall and a couple of other departments that got collected in that. Our offices, departments are working remotely right now. The one difference that people will see is the last time the town clerk's office was working remotely, the state had made some changes in state law that allowed us and process that allowed us to do more things than we can do remotely. So now, Shelley and Trish are at the helm. answering the calls and trying to work with people to get their needs met. I did want to publicly acknowledge the city of Bangor. They have agreed to collect excise tax. So if there's somebody that we can't manage with the drop box or mail, that absolutely has to get their vehicle registered, they'll be able to pay their excise with the city of Bangor, register at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and Bangor will send us the excise tax. So I thought that was very kind of them to come to us in our hour of need.
Sophia, and will that just be all online as well? Everything's
Yes.
just online.
Yeah, so most everybody who has registered their car in the past in Orono can always re-register online. And if folks had problems working that system, they just have to call the town office, and we have literally walked people through step by step what to do next.
I was wondering if you go online to register, are you redirected to Bangor? I mean, does it look confusing? Does it look like
Nope.
you're just registering? Okay.
So we want people to come to us first. And if they get to a point that we can't help, we will direct them to go to Bangor and walk them through what that process will look like.
So it would be the new vehicle registrations that
New
would need.
vehicle, yep, or re-registrations that have gone, I think it's more than 7 months is when you can't do them online anymore. Transit plates, that kind of thing, they'd have to go directly to the branch for. So at this point, our hope, we've had a lot of people who are taking tests, and my dream is that we will have a bunch of negative tests and that this will be a COVID experience and people will start filtering back to work on Wednesday, which would be amazing. If that isn't the case, if we start seeing more positive tests, then our ring just kind of keeps growing to collect more close contacts. So we're hopeful. And the goal is to kind of keep things patched together as best we can until we have everybody back. I also wanted to give you a brief update that we've met with the AV and their legal team. I have engaged Matt Tarasevich, the town's attorney, to represent us in this conversation about the AV's responsibilities as a landlord, property owner, and the town's responsibility for police response. And it's kind of like scratching a little piece of the wallpaper. You know, you think you're gonna just get a little divot and it keeps peeling off. Now we're talking with the district attorney's office because it doesn't make any sense for us to write tickets if we know they're not going to be, or summons people or arrest people if we know the DA is not going to follow through. So this has become a larger conversation. Unfortunately, we are scheduled to get back in touch with the AV this week. I just want to give a shout out to the University of Maine. They, folks from the Office of Student Life have just been wonderful partners through this process and done a lot of brainstorming, trying to find reasonable solutions that could be implemented to make everybody's life a lot easier. And we're very fortunate to have them. Also wanted to make you aware that we have made initial conditional offers for firefighters to come on board in May as part of our implementation of the 4th shift that we have agreed to by contract. I was a little bit nervous as we went through this process, always am when we are trying to bring one person on, let alone more than that. So right now it looks like we've got some very talented folks, and we'll keep you apprised as soon as we get people all the way through that process. We you knew that we received notification from the bond bank that we've been approved for the $1 million low interest loan through the state revolving loan fund for the sewer project up on in the Mahaney development. We didn't get any loan forgiveness, but it is a low interest loan, which is good. That paperwork has come back all signed off on. We just need the final bond work done, and we'll be able to pull that loan as we need reimbursement for the project. And when last we met, you knew that Black Bear Hydro Partners LLC had filed an abatement request for an $8.8 million value reduction for the hydro at the end of, the end of Mill Street, at, off Water Street. I'm sorry, off Broadway. There we go. At that point, I wasn't 100% sure how we were going to proceed because we still were without a town assessor. I have engaged our former assessor on a per diem basis, and he's been doing work for us as needed and helping us out. But this effort is a significant effort, and we were fortunate to be able to engage Bill Van Tynen to be a deputy assessor for us for this one matter, and Glenn Walker out of Glenn Sansucci, who are utility appraisers that we've used in the past. So we're moving forward with this effort. Today, I helped facilitate a 706A request, which is a funky way of saying a request for lots and lots of information from Black Bear about their operation. We should, settle in. This is going to be a long ride. And I will continue to bring you updates as things happen. Without my updates, you should just assume that we're still in the process. This is probably going to take well over a year, I would guess, to get through this process. I have more I could update you on, but I think those are the high level pieces that are most important to you. And I would be remiss as you guys are ending your meeting tonight to not publicly thank Councilor Gardner, Councilor Robertson, and Councilor Mitchell for all of their help as I have tried to move some things forward lately. They have just been phenomenal to work with, and they don't ever ask me to recognize them publicly, so I'm just going to. Much appreciated.
Thank you for doing that, Sophie, and thank you for the report. Is there any further business to come before us tonight? If not, let's wave our hands in adjournment. I'm not seeing them, but I'm assuming they're waving. And I'll come in and get my computer working. Thank you.